Hi, I'm Susan Cauley, and welcome to You're Not Alone, Surviving a Child's Disability. Obesity is very problematic in our society, and the risk is high for people with disabilities. Here to discuss this subject is Rachel Benson-Monroe, Director of Clinical Programming at the Multi-Service Eating Disorders Association, or Matta. Hi, how are you, Rachel?
I'm good, thank you.
Good, I'm glad you could make it.
Thank you, and thank you for having me.
You're welcome. Now, obesity in children with special needs occur in mainly what disabilities?
Well, first of all, I want to start off by saying that I myself do not have a disability, nor am I the parent of a child with a disability. So everything that I'm going to say is really with the understanding that I'm really going to turn to a lot of the parents that I work with and individuals with disabilities to inform my knowledge around this.
Sure.
And so, what we understand in our field about the term obesity is that it's referring to people with large body sizes, right? What we also know is that people in all different kinds of body sizes can be healthy or not healthy, and that their body size is not always indicative of that. And so especially for someone with a disability, for example, when we see someone on autism spectrum disorder, they may have sensory needs that make certain foods difficult or more fear-inducing. When someone who might have obsessive compulsive disorder, which is a mental illness that creates obsessions, as you might imagine, and compulsions around what foods to eat or not to eat, those can all create difficulties around eating, not to mention moving the body. If you are experiencing a disability where there are barriers to movement, that can create a situation where you may not be feeling so well in your body.
So what can cause obesity in children with developmental, intellectual, and autistic disabilities?
So, again, body sizes can vary, and the term obese actually means an excess of fat, if we look at the technical term. And obesity in the term is determined by body mass index, which body mass index, or
index.
BMI. Yeah, and it was actually developed in the 1970s by a Belgian statistician to be used to calculate mass populations of health and disease populations globally, as opposed to an individual measure of health. It's really just a ratio of height to weight, and so it doesn't actually tell you about someone's individual health. And so when we use this term, body mass index, when we use this piece of it's a medical calculator that has been used now by insurance companies in the medical field to determine someone's health, it doesn't always give us a real picture of what is happening with someone's body. And so instead of necessarily determining someone's body size for a way to indicate health, we like to look at behaviors. And so, for example, as I mentioned, if you are someone with limited mobility, that may make it really hard for you to move, and we know that movement is just good for overall well-being. Additionally, if you have food sensitivities or food intolerances, or if you have a sensory processing issue that makes food difficult for you, and for a variety of reasons, someone can gain weight and have a large body size. Additionally, though, someone can also experience all of those things and never gain weight and have a very small body size.
Well, it all has to do with metabolism, doesn't it?
Metabolism, genetics, access to good health care, the fact that there's a lot of stigma associated with body sizes, and we live in a world that is very cruel to people who live in large bodies. So that, of course, influences mental health and emotional health. So it's a real global picture. It's much more nuanced than I think a lot of our media outlets and even the medical field makes it.
But a person who's carrying 100 or 200 pounds more than they should, wouldn't that be considered obese?
Well, sure. So technically, because of BMI classifications, someone can be considered obese. But what I'm kind of trying to say is to question, instead of looking at someone's weight, looking at their habits. So for example, first of all, we don't really know over what weight, right? Because if we're using BMI to classify if someone's overweight, it's really hard to tell kind of what their ideal body weight or a set point range for them would be.
Right.
And so, because we know that people can be healthy or unhealthy in a variety of body sizes. So instead, if you have someone who you're wanting to kind of look at the global picture of their health, and they live in a very large body, instead of trying to tell them you need to weigh a certain amount, I would recommend to add in healthy behaviors. And see where your body wants to settle when you engage in mindful and joyful movement, when you nourish your body well, when you engage in general self-care behaviors. Then we can help determine where your body is meant to settle and what kind of body you're in when you take really good care of yourself, which we know, of course, when you're someone with a disability or an illness can be really, really difficult.
Right. Well, can you explain what food refusal and what food selectivity has to do with obesity?
Yeah, well, the general concept of food refusal and food selectivity with any disability in any body size is really challenging. So for example, there are a lot of people, if you have a sensory issue, you may not like or really have an issue with food that's really crunchy, or food that has a strong taste or a smell.
Right.
And so what can happen is that a lot of kids they just want really simple carbohydrates like bread, carbs, French fries, foods that are just more palatable and are less sensory stimulating.
Right.
Of course, when someone's diet is really limited by food selectivity or food refusal, they're not getting as much nutrients as they may if they had a more wide variety. And so really the issue is not necessarily their body size and their weight, but just their general nutrition. Right? Because if you have a person who's very thin and eats a very limited diet, we may not first pick up on their nutritional imbalances or deficiencies.
Right.
But it's when they gain a lot of weight is when we start to notice. And so I really recommend helping people, especially kids with disabilities, learn and get the appropriate support around finding a wide variety of foods that make them feel good in their bodies, and to have food be something that can be balanced in their life and not something that they have to necessarily worry or be concerned about when they already have more than enough things on their plate, no pun intended.
What do parents do though when a child say, well, I have a daughter who's autistic, and for the first, from the time she was a year old to almost 2 years old, the only thing I could get her to eat was fruit roll-ups.
Yeah.
And I don't know, I myself blame myself in a way for allowing her to only eat fruit roll-ups.
Yeah.
But I'm trying to keep peace,
Yeah,
I think.
absolutely.
Because if I didn't give it to her, she would throw a massive fit.
Yeah.
And it's, how do you deal with something like that?
Yeah. Well, I think what you're pointing to is the lack of support for parents of kids with disabilities. I mean, and that's a really difficult situation. And of course you want to keep the peace. And of course you want to get some nutrition in her, right? And so some nutrition is better than no nutrition.
Right.
And so it's really about helping parents learn how to engage in exposure and response. So giving parents the support they need to present kids with a wide variety of foods, especially at a young age, to get the support they need so that they don't feel guilt and shame for having a kid with a disability who will only eat a certain food. And to help the parents support the kid in engaging in, real specific training the same way you would train them in other habits. They just need extra support around learning in their bodies why they won't eat certain foods, and really doing an inventory and assessment of what's going on sensorially with that kid, and help slowly, thoughtfully bring in more nutrition, and knowing that there are going to be days where if it's a fruit roll-up, it's a fruit roll-up. Because having a kid with a disability is immensely challenging, I can certainly imagine. And so really reducing that stigma and isolation that can happen when you feel alone in parenting a kid with special needs.
Yeah, it was tough. What role does stress and anxiety play in obesity?
Well, a large one. I mean, first of all, talk about stress and anxiety. We live in a world where people are treated very cruelly for living in large bodies by their peers, by the medical institution, by families. So that causes in itself, we call that weight stigma. And so living in a world of weight stigma creates a ton of stress and anxiety in itself.
Yeah.
Because when we are treated badly for our body sizes, it certainly doesn't encourage us to engage in healthy self-care and learning how to accept our bodies and take really good care of it. So number one, living in a world that doesn't accept your body can cause great anxiety and stress. Bullying and teasing and unkindness makes you feel really bad about yourself.
And then you go to your safety thing, which is junk food.
Sure.
And, which is comfort food.
Sure, absolutely. We cope often with food. No matter who you are, if you have a disability or not, absolutely, food is a very available legal coping mechanism to use if you're feeling bad about yourself. And so there's a lot of reasons why people use food. And so also, if you are someone experiencing a disability, I don't have to tell you this, you're experiencing probably a lot of stress and anxiety just going through habits of daily life. And so that can create a lot of stress and anxiety and low self-worth and low self-esteem, which oftentimes, if you combine that with weight stigma, can lead a person to not treating their body very well.
Yes, yeah, I can understand that. How can you introduce a new diet to a person that has OCD or autism or other developmental disabilities?
So if you're dealing with someone with OCD, which is a mental illness, or a sensory processing disorder or a developmental delay, introducing a new type of eating can be immensely challenging. So just know that right off the bat.
Right.
But really it's about treating a child like a whole person, right? And taking into account that food is not just calories in and movement is calories out, but that food plays a large role in people's lives. That's psychological, social, emotional. And so helping to figure out what role food is playing in that kid's life at the time and helping with that sensitive treatment, knowing that there may be a lot of struggles, but that they need to be getting that nutrition that is going to help their body function really well. And so it's a lot of scaffolding. So it's baby steps, bit by bit, with support, and not using food as a punishment or a reward, which can be immensely challenging when you're dealing with behavior issues. Helping a kid figure out how to regulate their mood and feel safe in their bodies, not necessarily always using food, because it can be really easy if you have a kid who is having behavioral issues, who is feeling bad, who is stressed out and anxious, who has a developmental disorder or delay. Food is a very quick and easy way to try to help them regulate. And yet, it may not be actually a longer term solution to their need to be able to self-regulate mood or to deal with the experience of their developmental disorder. And yet, we know they need good nutrition. So scaffolding it, helping to understand, introducing food slowly and with support.
Do you introduce foods that sort of is similar at first?
Sure, absolutely.
You know, to kind of like pave the way for other things?
Yeah, we call it like behavior chaining or food chaining. And so let's just use your fruit roll-up example. So if you got fruit roll-ups, okay, so it's red and it's kind of squishy or sticky, kind of chewy. All right, so you know, how can we find those qualities that that kid really is drawn to, taste, sense, touch, smell, and try to incorporate more nutrition with, absolutely, you nailed it, with foods that are similar. And so setting small goals. So like, okay, you may not love it, but today we're gonna try 2 new fruits. And they're gonna, you know, really slowly scaffolding, setting goals and holding them accountable and helping them sit with, you know, they may not like this change. And so sometimes you have to be a little bit firm with the fact that they may not like it, but it's what their body needs.
I'm just curious, if they don't accept the newer foods, do you go back to the old food? Or do you
give out.
Just say you can't have anything else but that.
Right. Well, I think it takes like 15 to 20 exposures of a certain food for a kid to figure out if they like it or not.
Wow.
So it's repeat exposure to a food, and sometimes it's even just having it in the room, having it in the room, and then it's having it on the table, and then having it on the plate, and then having it next to the food that they like. So it's a slow scaffolding experience to in a sensory way, expose them to food that feels safe for them. Because for people with, for neurotypical people or people without these disabilities or disorders, introducing new food is as simple as you taste it and you like it or you don't and you put it away. But paying special attention with a lot of care and scaffolding and patience and support for the parents is usually what we recommend.
Yeah. Now, what does medication play a role in all of this?
Yep. Oh, totally. I mean, for folks with certain needs, a medication is going to be essential to their well-being. And sometimes those medications can cause weight loss or weight gain as a side effect. And so, people will come to me and say, I really can't stand that I've gained all this weight on this medication. Antipsychotic medication or others are used, they can cause a lot of weight gain. And so what I say is, listen, this is the body that you have. And the body that you have needs this medication to be well. And so we have to help you learn how to accept and treat well the body that you're in, regardless of its size, and learn how to accept it and take good care of it. You don't always have to love it, because that's asking a lot of someone to accept a situation that they may not be really happy about.
And society is so, so adamant about fat people. People that are obese, they must be doing something wrong.
Yes, or that they're lazy or dumb or have no willpower.
Right.
And in reality, people's bodies fluctuate all over the place, up and down through life. At any moment, someone may experience something that causes their body size to change. And so that's why we really help people understand that learning how to take care of your body well and respect it and accept the outcomes of that can be very difficult, but very healing when you're trying to accept weight gain as a result of a medication, weight loss, or other body changes that can happen as a result of a disability.
Well, what happens if a person with a disability doesn't quite understand that?
Oh, yeah, that's the question. I mean, that's a huge question. And that's why really sensitive and informed care by way of mental health professionals, nutritional professionals, medical professionals, and other, like for example, a support group. A support group for people, which implies that they're verbal, right? But a group setting or peer support can be really essential because it's helping you realize you're not alone. Just like your show says, like you're not alone if you're a person who has a disability or a mental disorder. And really having them access to sensitive care, like the fact that a nutritional professional might be able to work with someone and not stigmatize their body size and not tell them they need to lose weight, but help them develop healthy habits and learn how to give positive rewards for taking good care of their bodies can be helpful in assisting them to accept their bodies, even if they have a limited ability to understand that.
Yeah. What are some of the preventions that school and community can give to aid in reducing obesity in children with disabilities?
Yeah, I mean, an overall understanding and training of mental illness and developmental delays and disabilities and eating disorders in schools is hugely important. And there's been a large amount of success in this area of people in schools and educators being trained well to do this work. And I go into schools, and the amount of nuance and understanding and care that these educators have is just unbelievable, and I give them so much credit for that.
That's great.
And we can continue that. And so, for example, in health classes, it's something as simple as helping kids understand what body mass index is and how it can be harmful to their self-esteem and self-worth. Or helping kids understand the concept of health at every size, which is the idea that you can be healthy no matter what your body size is. So helping kids in health classes or even in special education programs learn about movement, learn about what is the effect of screen time, and how can we take good care of our bodies as a part of regular education, I think, is something that could be hugely important as we move forward.
Right. What can Matta do to help this situation?
So Matta is a nonprofit mental health organization specializing in helping individuals, all people who are feeling bad in their bodies or struggling with food issues or an eating disorder. And so we are available to consult with families, professionals, and assist them in helping kids get the care that they need. We work with a very wide network of professionals who are very sensitive to the needs of kids with disabilities and families. There are wonderful organizations who have this specialized knowledge, and in fact, many of the professionals that we refer to are parents themselves of kids with disabilities.
Right.
And they have a deep and nuanced understanding of it beyond their professional expertise. And so we can connect people and families to treatment that is sensitive and informed. Yep. We have support groups, we train professionals, and we overall provide support in the community for anyone who's struggling with their body, whether or not they have a disability.
Do you happen to give training to adults?
Yeah.
And how to treat, their child with a disability?
Absolutely. So we just actually our whole staff got trained in this wonderful Australian model called Confident Body, Confident Child, which is specifically geared towards teaching parents how to feed their children well, thoughtfully and sensitively, without body shaming them. And that can be a kid with a disability, without a disability. And so we empower families and professionals on how to treat their clients and their loved ones with respect and dignity in an informed way so that they can create a healthy family or to help their clients succeed in whatever their goals are for their health.
Wow, that's pretty intensive.
Yeah, we really care about it. We know that when people feel bad in their bodies, they don't take good care of themselves, and that's really can create a generation of people who are constantly dieting or feeling bad about themselves or developing eating disorders. And we want to empower people to feel good in their bodies, accept their bodies, and even if they are struggling with a special need or disability, to learn to appreciate what their bodies can do and just for being who they are.
Yeah, that's a high order, though.
I know.
A lot of people.
I know.
A lot of people don't feel good, inside their bodies, and they're always complaining about, gaining weight or, the fact that they need to lose weight. Yep. And, it's crazy.
It is, and it's sad, and yet we've seen progress. We do see progress when we take the focus off of weight and we take the focus off of stigmatizing body size, especially for young kids who are very vulnerable. They can feel well in their bodies. And so we have to swim upstream, and it's hard. But it's platforms like this and people like you who are spreading this information that really make us feel positive that we can make a difference.
That's great. Yeah. Now, I'm just curious, what foods are bad for them, for a person, and what foods are good? And how does this apply to children with disabilities?
Yep. And so I love that you asked that question. We get that question so much, and my answer might be a little frustrating, which is that I don't believe there are any good or bad foods. I believe, and Matta believes, that all foods can fit in a diet. Now, of course, there are foods that are really nutritionally dense.
Right.
And there are foods that have zero nutritional value, right? We know this. And yet, when you only allow this idea that a good food can go into your body and that means that you're good, that can lead to, first of all, a lot of issues around the desire to eat a certain food and eating in secret, and shame around foods that are really what we call hyperpalatable, foods with a lot of sugar, a lot of fat, a lot of salt. And yet also, eating in a well-balanced way is part of a normal life.
Right.
So when we include a life that allows for enjoying and indulging in foods that, they have no nutritional value, but oh my God, they taste so good. Or they have to do with social and emotional connection, like on Thanksgiving or a holiday or a birthday party. When you have a homemade cake that someone has made for you with love and care, yeah, it's chock full of butter and sugar.
Right.
But it's a part of our culture to share food. And so how to enjoy that cake that we know, yeah, it's not going to help your body function necessarily with a lot of fuel, but boy, is it going to make you feel comfortable in the moment, connected to other people in the moment, and indulge all of your senses, which is really joyful.
Yeah.
How do we balance that with fueling our bodies really well with foods that we know are going to make us function really nicely in the world?
How do you figure that out?
Well, it's really about listening to your body's messages. So it's like when you eat certain foods, taking an inventory of like, how does my body feel right now? For example, if you're going, and that has to do with also the timing of meals. Like if you're skipping meals because you're working really hard and you're rushing and not able to sit down and really enjoy a snack or a meal, that's going to probably affect your ability to do well in other areas like schools. Right? If a kid is being asked to eat in a busy and crowded cafeteria with a lot of sensory stimuli and noise and sounds and chair. Exactly. Sometimes also kids are asked to eat at like 10:30 in the morning for lunch, right? Or 10 in the morning, which is the school has to do that. But they may not be in any position to eat in that moment.
Right.
And so when they do eat, maybe later on in the day, they may overeat. Or they may be drawn towards foods that aren't as nutritionally valuable to them. And so helping a kid be able to eat well in the situation they're in, given their special needs, can be really important. Allowing kids to indulge in foods that don't have nutritional value, but just taste amazing as part of a balanced diet.
Right. As long as it's limited.
Sure.
I mean, you have to limit that.
Yeah, we call them sometimes foods and always foods. So like, helping a kid make choices. Okay, a couple times a week we have sometimes foods. So you get to pick what you want for your sometimes food. And then there are foods that are always foods, which are, your whole grains and your fresh fruits and vegetables and, proteins. Those are always foods that we need, our bodies need. And then there are sometimes foods which are really just for enjoyment and pleasure. And so helping kids learn that balance, and not in a shameful way, like you can't have this, but we can have this. It's just best if we have it less often than our always foods. Just finding the way to phrase it that's non-shaming, but is also acknowledging nutrition.
Right. Well, I thank you very much for being on the show, Rachel.
Thank you, Sue.
And I hope you are successful in your venture.
Thank you, you as well.
Thank you. Children with disabilities need intervention to stop or prevent obesity before it seriously affects their health. With a lack of accessible programs, the burden falls on parents and caretakers. With guidance, education, and a lot of patience, parents can be successful in teaching good eating habits to even the most challenging children with disabilities. Join us next time on You're Not Alone, Surviving Your Child's Disability.